in blended families, you may be rebuilding something you didn't break, but you're also doing it in coordination with somebody who may have.
That's right.
So it's like the leader isn't gone, the other leader isn't gone.
Yeah, they're still around.
You're still interacting with them. So you're having to
That's good.
interact and rebuild in a time where other people are still trying to break the house down.
You may be building something that no one ever sees. Yeah. You may be doing the foundational work, and it's your great-grandkids that actually is taking it vertical, and they're building on the foundations that we lay.
Love it.
And so I think it's important for parents to remember, we may never get accolades. We may never see the fruit of our labor. I think that's the test of all of us, right? Am I willing to plant a seed that will grow a tree that I may never pick the fruit of it, but my grandkids will?
Your blended family has a 100% chance of success when you do it God's way. We're Blended Kingdom Families, and we want to provide biblical resources to heal and restore families with a message of hope for the next generation.
Hey guys, welcome to the BKF podcast. I'm so excited to be with you today, along with one of just the best guys that I know, Dr. Jon Chasteen, senior pastor, Victory Church, Oklahoma, and Grapevine, Texas. All around good dude, great golfer. You're 6'7" though, so you have like a cheat code.
Yeah.
When it comes to hitting the golf ball.
You have to go straighter.
Yeah, and he has written an incredible book that we're going to really kind of translate as it relates to blended families. But he wrote an incredible book called Re-Leader. So I want to give you a chance, Jon, just to, one, tell us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah.
Those folks who've never met you and don't know you.
Yeah.
But second question is, why did you write the book?
So my background is higher ed first. I was a VP at a university, and that's why I have a DR in front of my name. I wanted to pursue that, so I have a doctorate of education degree, and then became a pastor. I'm going to do a real fast-forward version. Became a pastor kicking and screaming, and then lead pastor 2014, and then 2018 went back to be the president of the King's University and did that for 5 years while I continued to pastor. And then in last summer, stepped down from TKU, and now I only have one job. It's kind of great.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Just one.
And so I realized last summer, actually, as I was just conversating with a friend of mine, that I think there's a certain set of people who have a particular skill to not necessarily, they may not be entrepreneurial. They may not be good at starting something, building something, growing something. They might be good at restarting something. And I just begin to see a pattern in my life where every leadership role I had, I didn't launch it. I didn't start it. I didn't plant it.
Yeah.
I didn't, I came in on the heels of someone else.
Yeah.
And in a lot of the instances on the heels of someone who had broke something.
Yeah.
And so kind of came up with this word, and, I think there's those of us that aren't leaders, we're re-leaders. And so the title of the book is Re-Leader, How to Fix What You Didn't Break.
Wow.
Yeah.
The similarities between those concepts and what we face in blended families fits together just absolutely perfectly. How to fix something you didn't break. And, I think about those
Or
families.
that you did break.
Or that you did break. Yeah, broke
So
it.
that's the thing in leadership too, right? Sometimes you broke it, sometimes you didn't, but it still needs to be fixed.
Yeah, still needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
So I love that we're bringing this as kind of a translated message for blended families, because this book is a lot, it's written with, I think, some very, I wouldn't say generalized, but it can be applied to a lot of different areas. I want to take what would you consider like the top 2 or 3 things you're like, hey, as it relates to families, as it relates, and maybe more specifically to husbands, to stepfathers, to those people who may be watching going, man, I'm tasked with leading this family. And I know from my situation going into something and saying, hey, I'm dealing with problems that I had nothing to do with. And that I don't even know that I can fix them.
Yeah.
I just know that I'm charged with leading in a space right now where I'm trying to go the healthiest way I can to be the most successful I can as a leader of my family.
Yeah.
And this idea of how do I fix something that I either did or didn't break, and what we can apply from this book to our families. Maybe take the top 1 or 2 things. What do you think mostly applies?
I would say, it's interesting. You could really take that book and remove words like organization or church or ministry and just plug in marriage, and a lot of it very is similar. I would say a couple of the big ones is when you re-lead anything, whether it's an organization, in this case a marriage or a family, one, there's trust that's been lost, right? So when I came in on the heels at the church, my predecessor had a moral failure. Trust had been lost. And there's an old saying that trust is gained by the spoonful and lost by the bucketful.
Yeah.
And it's like that in marriage, right?
Yeah.
And there's just situations where you're trying to gain the trust of your stepchildren, or you're trying to gain the trust of even your spouse. It's a new relationship, and you're trying to build a trust where trust has been broken.
Yeah.
Where, if their previous spouse had cheated on them, there's going to be a bend towards having a really hard time trusting anybody. The next spouse, so to speak. So I think one of the big things I write about in the book is patience. That it's a marathon, not a sprint. In the business world, Scott, you're a entrepreneur, and I watch you. You're fast paced, quick decision, go. And a lot of time when you're re-leading, there's so much wreckage and rubble that it's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And so the re-leader that applies to family too, you're really going to have to retrain your brain to know that this is not going to happen overnight. This is going to take a long time.
There's so many things that I can take on that. Is, I'm a very type A personality. I love to make those decisions and kind of move on. And, it's kind of like when the room is dirty, I just want to clean it. I want to move on to the next room. And you're 100% right. Sometimes you just have to sit in the middle of the dirty room and just be there.
Well, I'm like that too. I move on fast. Yeah. Like I forgive fast. I move on fast. And you have to realize that others don't.
Yeah.
Others process things differently. And so just because we're over something or can move past something doesn't mean they can. And it's not the kind of thing you can rush. You can't rush trust. You can't rush that process. And it takes a long time. So that's one that's really similar. And I do think it is really kind of training yourself. I think all of us can be re-leaders. Some of us are more bent towards it naturally. But I think we can all train ourselves to re-lead during times of where things are broken. There's a particular passage, I don't have my Bible in front of me. It's in Isaiah, I believe it's chapter 52, where they're coming back from Babylonian exile, and Nebuchadnezzar has tore down the temple. Everything is destroyed, and they're coming back from exile, and there's this really great word that comes in the book of Isaiah, and it basically says some of you will rebuild the desolate cities. And it's saying, hey, I need you to focus on building the right things, because they're coming back, right? The first thing they want to do is rebuild their own houses. Yeah. And the Lord gives this word of, hey, I need you to help me rebuild the temple. This is really central. This is really important. And so there's different translations of it. One of the translations, I think, is the New King James Version. It says, some of you will rebuild the desolate cities and rebuild the walls. And it says you will become known as rebuilders. And I think there's always seasons of our life where I love that it says some of you. It's like some of you will.
Some of you won't.
Some of you won't.
Yeah.
And so there's this decision we have to make, and it's a real intentionality that there's some things. Here's the thing, even marriages that have good marriages, that have been married 50 years. Yeah. A lot of times there's one or two things that are broke in our marriage. And instead of dealing with them and instead of getting them out on the table to talk about them, it's easier to just shove them in a corner and not deal with it, whether that's sexual, whether it's relational, whether it's something from the past. So it's just this real intentional thing, right, that you have to shift your brain to think, okay, I'm not, for a season in this area of my family, I need to re-lead. And maybe it's a child. Maybe there's a child who was deeply wounded by their dad or by their mother, and you're coming in as this new father figure, so to speak, or a new mother, and you're just going to have to lead differently, and you're going to have to do it tenderly, and you'll have to deal with this child differently than you would another child, more patient.
So let me ask this question. What do you do when you get angry with the rebuilding process? So give an example here. You maybe you caught a charge of, and I'm kind of parallel this to different industries, but let's say you're leading an organization and you caught a charge to do this. In blended families, let's say you fell in love, and so many times in blended families, you don't really see the complete story. I don't know that the complete story is ever really completely in front of you because the situation changes so often as kids get older, as relationships change, as new children are introduced. I can see a point in time where you're like, I want this, but I don't want to rebuild this. I didn't break it. I'm frustrated. I'm
100%.
angry. I'm mad at other people that I have to deal with. Because in blended families, you may be rebuilding something you didn't break, but you're also doing it in coordination with somebody who may have.
That's right.
So it's like the leader isn't gone. The other leader isn't gone.
Yeah, they're still around.
You're still interacting with them. So you're having to
That's good.
interact and rebuild in a time where other people are still trying to break the house down.
That's good. That's a really good point. And I think that is unique in the re-leader idea versus like a business world. That quote unquote former boss is still around in the family.
Yeah.
It's still around.
Yeah.
And I think there's some real similarities there. And you know, I've never been a part of a blended family, so I want to be real sensitive to that because I've never been in those shoes.
Yeah.
But there is a part of my book where I talk about that. Zerubbabel was the guy that came back to rebuild the temple. There's so many parallels there. And if you ever want to read about it, you can go. It's in Haggai, it's in Zechariah, it's in Ezra. So many beautiful similarities. And what happens is Zerubbabel comes back to rebuild the temple, and the Bible says that he rebuilt the foundation, and the people that were there before and saw the original temple wept. And the people that had never seen the original temple were rejoicing. And the scriptures literally says that they could not determine who was weeping and who was rejoicing. And so there's these similarities where there's two different people, ones that were there in the previous. And you can think about a child, like they want mom and dad to get back together.
Yeah,
they want the previous, right? So when there's a new marriage, they're weeping. Like they don't like it. And then you've got another people that are sitting there singing. And so what happened, Zerubbabel stopped. He quit. He stopped rebuilding the temple. He got so discouraged that he quit. And the reason we know that is because it gives these timelines about who was king, and roughly about 17 years passed. This dude quit for 17 years until this prophet Zechariah came. And you can read about it in Zechariah 4. Zechariah 4 is a prophetic word from the Lord back to Zerubbabel saying, no, you are the one that's chosen to do this, and you will lay the final stone as the capstone of the temple. And that's where we get all these this is what I would say to people. It's where we get all these coffee mug verses that a lot of people will recognize, but the context of them are encouraging Zerubbabel to finish rebuilding what was broke. And he got so discouraged that he quit. And one of those verses in Zechariah chapter 4 is when the Lord, in the scripture that says, do not despise small beginnings. It says, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. That's what's interesting. You would think that verse would say, the Lord rejoices to see the work finished.
Yeah.
But that word to Zerubbabel was like, hey, I know you're discouraged. I know it's hard. I know this sucks. I know it seems like you're never going to finish this thing. But don't despise small beginnings. And so what I would say to people that are in the mix of that is you really need to look for the small wins. And instead of being discouraged by the small wins, be encouraged by it. And the Lord is jumping up and down, rejoicing the one day that you sit down with that child and have just a 10-minute good day, right? And the rest of the week was terrible, but you had 10 minutes where you made eye contact and there was meaningful conversation. That is a small beginning. And the Lord says, don't despise that. Don't despise the small beginnings, because the word also says, he who began a good work in us will see it through to completion. So I would encourage people just to look for those small wins, and find ways to rejoice in it. Find ways to celebrate it.
I love that. So it's so evident throughout our journey with Jesus, with our spiritual walk, that it's not a walk to completion here. We're not going to complete it.
Right.
This is not a start and a finish. In our earthly being. And as that translates, if we kind of look at some parallels, you're right. Being a stepfather or being a re-leader of a family, we don't need to celebrate the end that may never come
Right.
here. Just like I tell step parents all the time, you may not get a win.
Yeah.
You may not get this win,
Yeah.
this amazing breakthrough where this child's like, man, you may not get that.
Yeah.
But what you can get is, even in the frustration, and kind of where the question started is what do you do when you get frustrated?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got to take a break.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got to take a breath. Sometimes you need to get reinforced by your spouse
Yeah.
to say, hey, keep going, keep moving.
Yeah.
And then it's the next day of just starting over
Yeah.
and just saying, hey, where do we build from here? How do we take one more step forward
Yeah.
in the path that God's laid out
Well,
for us?
you're doing foundation work,
Yeah.
and that same passage. I wish I had a Bible because I'm pretty sure somebody's going to listen to this podcast. I looked it up, and that wasn't the right verse. I'm almost positive it's Isaiah 52:12.
Yeah.
And one of the it's New King James. It says you will build foundations for future generations.
Yeah.
And so you have to think of it too as just as what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
We get discouraged because of the timeline.
Yeah.
And many times what we're called to do is build foundations. And that's what's hard for some dads or moms because they didn't have a good dad or a good mom as a model. And so, but we can begin a new generation. We can build foundations, and that's the frustrating thing about foundations is you work so hard to build something that no one will ever see.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about this in my book, but I used to have a neighbor that moved in when I was in Oklahoma City, and this new skyscraper they were building is called the Devon Tower. And this was many years ago, and they're building it. And he moved in, and we're talking in the front yard, and I'm like, "What do you do?" He's like, "Oh, I build foundations for skyscrapers." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." He said, "I'm building the new one downtown."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "How long will that take to build?" He said, "It'll take about 4 years." And I'm like, 4 years to build a foundation? And then, kind of in a smart aleck, I was just trying to be funny. I don't think he liked it, but I said, "How does it feel to build something that no one will ever see?"
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of giggled and laughed, and then he looked back at me and he said, "Yeah, but the height of that structure depends on how good I do my job."
Yeah.
And I think it's good for us to look at parenting or building great families in that context.
Yeah.
That if you're starting at ground zero, trying to build a family or rebuild a family, you may be building something that no one ever sees.
Yeah.
You may be doing the foundational work, and it's your great grandkids that actually is taking it vertical, and they're building on the foundations that we lay.
Love it.
And so I think it's important for parents to remember, hey, we may never get accolades. We may never see the fruit of our labor. And I think that's the test of all of us, right? Am I willing to plant a seed that will grow a tree that I may never pick the fruit of it? But my grandkids will. And I'm going to plant a tree, and I may never sit under the shade of it. I may be in the scorching sun because my parents didn't plant the right seeds. But we're going to start for us and our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids. And to me, that's real leadership, right? That's real parenting. That's laying my life down for my family. And so I think, I don't know if that's depressing or encouraging.
Well, the truth of it is, it's the reality that we face. The number of people that I've met, coached, counseled, that their purpose is re-leading the next generations of people.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
they've come from very dysfunctional backgrounds. Vanessa and I joke about it a lot. Our parents were off the rails, both of ours. And then now they made choices that put their lives back in Jesus' hands at late points in their life.
Yep.
And we are very thankful for that. But the idea of the future generations, I think there's a big movement right now where people are going, I'm done with generational curses. And I think those people who are tuning into that, I want to kind of switch to the last part of the book, which is reinforce. Because I love that word. I love this concept of reinforcement. And the fact that, one, I think it's a great book. And Jon, you did an incredible job with laying an idea out there that can be applied in so many different areas. But I also don't want to miss an opportunity. You have the privilege of leading Victory Church, which is a tremendous organization, great people. If you have looked at some of our past podcasts, I had Pastor Wade on here not too long ago, and we talked about the importance of community. I want to ask you a different type of question, because sometimes being a re-leader, we're required to connect with other people who are leading us as well. So people of influence, people of pastors, or, it's part of like building that community. It's part of building a concept that where we reinforce what we're building. So my question to you is, as a senior pastor, how would you encourage other people who are in that re-leading process to reinforce the foundation they're building through either community or the local church or through a relationship with Jesus or whatever that may look like?
Yeah.
I know it's a broad question. I didn't tell you I was going to ask it beforehand, so I kind of caught me off guard. But how would you encourage people in that way?
Yeah. So the thought of that reinforced in the book is, so Zerubbabel rebuilds the temple, and I'll get to answer your question, but let me give you context. Zerubbabel rebuilds the temple, and it sits unguarded for 70 years. And so when Nebuchadnezzar came and tore down the temple, he didn't just tear down the temple; he tore down the walls, because the walls are what protected or reinforced the temple. And so if you build something of value, you dang sure better protect it, right? Because when you build something of value, the people who take notice the most are the enemy.
Yeah.
And when you build something valuable, people will want to come and destroy it or take it. And so, no one wanted to rebuild the wall, and who knows why, but along comes Nehemiah 70 years later. And I think, I don't know this for a fact, but I think maybe there's an element of, why did it take 70 years for them to build a wall? And Nehemiah built it back in like 50 some days. So I think it's because it wasn't real glamorous. Like, it's cool to say you built the temple, but I mean, how hard is it to build a wall? You just stack some rocks up on top of it. It's not like it takes a rocket scientist to do that. And so I think a lot of times we have these marriages that are sacred, that are really important, and we're building families, and this is one of the most important things we can do on this earth, if not the most important thing we can do in the natural, build a family.
Yeah.
And so you think about the importance of family and how the enemy is attacking it in our nation. And it's because we don't reinforce it. We don't protect our own families, And so I think there's a lot of things at play at that.
Yeah.
And I think it's getting in a local church. There's reinforcement there. And my kids play sports. I get it. There's weekends where my son has a basketball game and he may need to miss church, but we would never let our kids miss school. Like if our kids came in the room and they're like, "Hey, I don't feel like going to school today," you're like, "Get your butt up out of bed. You're going to school." Yeah. But for some reason,
are we fearful they're going to miss something important that one day,
know.
and we're like, no, the rest of your life,
they're idiots. The rest
something's going to be taught today that you can't miss.
But exactly. But if our kids come downstairs and they're like, "I don't want to go to church today," we're like, "Okay,
man, that's good."
And so, and again, I'm a pastor, so I'm probably a little biased there, but that's just one example. There's a lot of examples of that, right? So how are we building community? Who are we letting our kids hang out with? I'm in that phase because I have teenagers. It's like when your kids are really young, you're trying to keep things, away from them, fall hazards, because they don't want to hit their head. And then when they're teenagers, it kind of turns to be the opposite. You go from wanting to keep people away, keep things away, to keeping them away from things. You know? So I want to keep my kids. What are they watching? What are they listening to? And I'm not, we listen to country music. I'm not saying only let your kids listen to worship. I'm not saying that. I'm not being religious. I'm just saying we have to be careful about what are we letting, do we even know who our kids are hanging out with? Do we even know what's on their phones? Do we know what they're watching? So those just become those areas of reinforcement, because if it's valuable, let's protect it.
Well, and that's where we talk about that reinforcement is, and this is where the encouragement side of this. I know people who are listening, they're frustrated in the re-leader process. If you're in a blended family, you're in a re-leader.
Yeah, 100%.
You're there. So I would highly encourage to grab the book, grab resources. But the frustration that comes at certain points, the things that I'll take away from this are, one, sometimes it's good just to be quiet and be present and be in there. So sometimes there's a pause moment before you take your next step. And that consistency is a lot of what builds trust. It builds trust in families. It's when it gets hard, are you going to run for the hills?
Yep.
And the other side of it is you got to reinforce. You have to reinforce what you're building, because if you don't, you're allowing whatever element to come in, and whether it's people or things or co-parenting or all the elements that deal with blended families, you're allowing your foundation to be adjusted based on what happens.
Yeah.
So I'm excited that we took an opportunity to do this. I will say, scratch the surface. This is just the scratch.
Yep.
If you're interested in reading more about this, you can pick up Releader on Amazon. Where else can you get it? You get it on Amazon. You can get it on.
Amazon's the best place.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go to my website, releader.co.
Yeah. You produce. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed this. But you produce a lot more content than just this book.
You have a podcast called Releader.
Yeah.
I have a website where I write every week.
Yeah.
The vast majority of that content is leadership focused.
Yeah.
But it's all very applicable to family.
Yeah.
Anything that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Right. That needs to be reled. Yeah.
And where else can they find you, Jon?
Probably at the church, victory.church, or on Instagram.
Yeah.
At Jon Chasteen, no H.
I love it. I love it. Well, Jon, thanks for being with us. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope that you take a minute to just find some encouragement in this and find that there are some elements out there that can help you as you re-lead your home. So thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time. Have a good day.
Hey friends, so glad you were here with us today, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find more resources from Blended Kingdom Families at blendedkingdomfamilies.com. Join us again next time as we talk about more blended family topics. Be blessed in all that you do, and remember, nothing will be impossible with God.